Access Radio, the future of radio and podcast. No limit to what we do.
Access Radio, WIAX, the future of radio and podcast. No limit to what we do.
Phoenix, soul, clarity and connection through conversation. Phoenix, soul, clarity and connection through conversation.
Hi, everybody. Big Al in the house. And there seems to be a little bit of background. I am Yaz. Welcome to Phoenix Soul. You're joining us. You're joining me. I'm live from Oregon, Eugene, Oregon, that is. And I'm so proud to be here. Like I said, Phoenix Soul right here at iAccess Radio, the future of podcasts. And radio, there's no limit to what we do. And I'm Yaz HURSTON. And again, if you want to give us a call, we have an incredible show. You can feel free to give us a call at 347-708-0216. So this week's show will be a little bit different from where we were last week. As you know, we were finishing up our breast cancer awareness month. We had an incredible guest, and I will definitely be keeping you all informed and updated about Michelle Jenkins' progress. But this week is incredibly, incredibly important to me. It's exciting for me because I get to talk about one of my favorite subjects in the world. And as you all know, that's college football. I also like regular football too, but college football is so cool to me. Because one of my favorite players I get to watch every week play. But that being said, it's more to this. There's a whole world that's also interested in college football. There are not only players, there are not only students, there's not only fans, but there are podcasts, there are analysts, there are people out there that focus to try to share true information to give a perspective to players. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that I liked all of them, because I don't like all of them, but that I do like quite a few. And one of the podcasts that I enjoy the most, if you haven't heard about it, is called the QB11 Show. And it's presented by Scoop Duck. Now, Scoop Duck has a lot of different representations of who he is, but we like to call him today on this show, Doug Scott. So if I may introduce you to this man and welcome you to others, Mr. Doug Scott, the host of the QB11 show. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Phoenix Soul, Doug.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really great to be here. First of all, I'm not Scoop Duck. That's actually Scoop Duck is a website that covers Oregon Ducks recruiting and inside information. It's run by a friend of mine named Justin Hopkins, who helps. We kind of co-market each other, if you will. So, want to set that record straight. But I appreciate the warm welcome and the intro, and I'm very excited to be here. So, thanks for having me, Yaz.
Okay, great. So, we're everybody's listening. Hey, cuz. Okay, what's up, Shadana?
My
um,
second live appearance on another podcast, so
is that
I'm
right?
getting used to it, I guess. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I think it's important that media supports media. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
And we got people from Ohio, so just know, be careful what you say, because just letting you know, Doug, you got people from Ohio watching. Um, but no, seriously, we're both FYI, everybody, we're both in Oregon. I had an opportunity to meet Doug when we first started the season in Oregon, and the funny story to be told is I met Doug tailgating. Everybody knows me for tailgating when I was at URI, and Doug is my tailgating partner. We exchange dish every time we tailgate. What do you think is your favorite dish that you've made?
This year, the Kahlua pig that I made for the Hawaii game was definitely the hit. In fact, I've had people I tailgate with about 20 people, and several of them have been doing this for a very long time. They said that's the best tailgate food they've ever had. So that was a big compliment, and it did turn out pretty good if
Kahlua
I
pig.
do say so myself. Kahlua pig.
I
Yeah.
didn't have any of that, but I did have your
How did you miss?
cheesesteaks and I had your fajitas, and they were incredible.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, you're welcome. You're
And
welcome.
your fried chicken a couple weeks back was excellent as well,
Thank you
and I
so much.
loved your seafood salad this week. Was
Thank
also
you, thank you. And you push people out the way to get to my table to get that. I made sure I saved it, and I'll
that
make
last
sure
piece
I
of
get
chicken.
some.
Yeah,
Yeah, that last piece of, everybody knows what that means, the last piece of chicken. And so Doug got it.
I got it. I got it.
So
You even
Doug,
called
you're
and saved
from,
it for me, so I appreciate it.
oh, of course, of course. So Doug, you're from Oregon, right?
I am from
Um,
Oregon originally. Yes.
Tell us a little bit about growing up, what it's like to grow up in Oregon.
Yeah. Boy, I don't know if I'm 49 years old. I'll be 50 in a couple months. So I've lived here most of my life outside of a stint away for college. But um, you know, Oregon, couple of cities in Oregon, obviously Portland being the biggest one, Eugene and Salem, right? Outside of those three cities, historically is a pretty rural state. Certainly not a very diverse state, as you've probably seen in your trips out here. Um, and there's a lot of history behind all that we don't have to get into. But um, growing up, yeah, I lived in a small community. I kind of, and it's funny. We didn't have a lot of money, but I never really realized we didn't have a lot of money because we kind of just were like everybody else in our town. Yeah, there was a couple of rich people here or there, or the rich people that we thought were rich. Certainly not by depending on your standards, right? But we were happy. I mean, we just ran around town, rode our bikes, played football, played basketball. We just outside, right? It was the I grew up in the '80s mostly, so it's kind of the latchkey kid generation, right? My mom was would work 2 or 3 jobs. My parents were divorced, so after school we just come home, let ourselves in, get a snack, get on our bikes, run around town with our friends, and be home by dinner time, right? So it was a pretty safe, pretty small little town, but that's kind of the way I grew up, and yeah.
Was it a focus on college football when you were growing up?
For me, I would say when I first started following football, it was more NFL. Probably like 9, 10 years old, I started watching NFL quite a bit. And then actually what got me into college football was when I was about 12, 13 years old, I started working at this corner grocery store in my town. And my job was counting bottles, right? So people brought it, this before they had machines that counted your bottles for you. So you had to count them. It was nasty work because these bottles were disgusting. People bring back, right? So I had to count these bottles and I had to take them into the back room and sort them. And I stocked like the beer fridge and stocked the soda and stuff like that. So I spent a lot of time in the back room at this little store. The only thing I had to keep myself entertained while I was sorting cans into the Pepsi ones here and the Coke ones here and 7-Up there was the radio. And I worked on Saturday afternoons. And Saturday afternoons on the radio was college football. So it would either be the Ducks or the Beaver game would be on the radio. And for whatever reason, I just kind of glommed on to the Ducks as my team. They weren't a very good team at that time. They hadn't been to a bowl game in 20 years. But they had a quarterback named Bill Musgrave, who was kind of, he had a good career at Oregon. I think he went on to the NFL. They had a couple of exciting players. So I just grew up kind of listening to them on the radio. And that's how I kind of became a Duck fan. And then, as I got older and got into high school and beyond, the Ducks started getting better and better. Went to a bowl game their first time in 1989, the first bowl game in like 25 years. And they went to a Bowl about 5 years later. So then it just kind of started growing from there. And my love and passion for the Ducks just kept growing and growing and getting stronger and stronger. And I really started following them quite closely, probably the last 20 years.
Yeah, and so when you decided to really go deep into following them, um, what was going on at the Ducks at the time as far as the talent?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it was probably around the mid 90s. I went to my
Mhm.
first Ducks game in, I think it was 1994, 1995, maybe a year or two after they went to the Rose Bowl. And
Mhm.
they weren't as good that year, a little bit down. It was actually what we call the Civil War, used to call the Civil War game against Oregon State, Oregon. It was in Autzen Stadium, and it was a terrible football game. I think the final score was 12-6. There was a single touchdown scored in the game. There was like 7 turnovers. Wasn't a good game. But it was fun, and it was pouring down rain. I sat in the student section with a friend of mine who went to Oregon, and we just got poured on the whole game. It was a bad football game, but we won, and that was my first experience. Now, funny enough, I didn't actually go back to see another in-person Oregon game until 2017 when I first got season tickets. So it was over 20 years in between. But in that time, I became a really big fan I didn't go to games, but I watched every week. I started, and the Ducks started getting better and better, particularly starting in the early 2000s, 99, 2000, 2001. They had 3 really strong seasons in a row. They went back to they finished second in the national polls in 2001. They should have been in the BCS title game, but the formula kept them out, and they ended up finishing second in both the polls that year. And then just kind of throughout the 2000s, just kept getting better and better. Chip Kelly came in 2007 as the offensive coordinator, and then 2009 as the head coach, and that team obviously was very successful and really took Oregon to new heights nationally. Obviously, the uniforms and all that stuff that got them a lot of attention nationally as well. But kind of that late 2000s, early 2010s, Marcus Mariota going to the national championship game, winning the Heisman, all those things were when the team really exploded. But by then, I was already a pretty hardcore fan for sure.
So what was the when you were already a hardcore fan? How was it, or how was the energy, or how did the energy shift when Marcus joined, got on the team, and was creating all this energy, and then became Heisman?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like he was kind of came along when Oregon was already kind of at its height of popularity. So Chip Kelly was there with Dennis Dixon, who probably would have won the Heisman, or was certainly on track to win the Heisman before he got injured in 2007. And they had another quarterback after that who took them to a national championship game named Darren Thomas. So it was really more about the system that Oregon was playing at the time. It was very innovative, very high flying, very fast paced, kind of high tempo, and kind of ahead of its time in college football. And so that it was kind of more of the system than any individual player. And then as Chip Kelly was leaving is when Marcus was kind of ascending, right? So you started seeing, he was just an incredible college football player, obviously, one of the best, most accomplished college quarterbacks of all time. So that, getting back to the national title game with him, not winning it, unfortunately. Now it's kind of the story of Oregon, close calls, second in 2001, second in 2010, second in 2012, second in 2014. So, a lot of seconds, still looking for that first, but, yeah, that was a magical run. That from 2007 through 2014, it really was just an incredible 7-year stretch where Oregon was playing at the height, the highest levels of college football every year consistently, playing a very exciting brand of football to watch, being a national contender on the national stage. And that was it was just such a departure from most of the history of Oregon football, right? And then obviously have been able to maintain that level for the most part. And certainly this year, obviously ranked number 6 right now, just 1 loss on the season, but, in control of their own fate to get where they need to go, where they want to go this season. So all their goals are in front of them. And I mean, we were talking about this on our podcast that we actually released today. This is the most talented Oregon team we've ever had. It's more talented than those teams with Marcus and Chip and all those. Those teams won with a innovative style that college football wasn't ready for. This team is winning because it's just better. It's just better than everyone they're playing. And you see that domination on the line of scrimmage, particularly on both sides of the ball.
So let's talk about Pac-12. in general,
Sure.
right? 'Cause
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen all the teams play and all of them evolving. What's been what's been something that exciting, or what's been the exciting part about watching Pac-12, being that, as you know, for our listening audience, Pac-12 is going through all of them going through realignment, and Pac-12 will be dissolved, and you've been playing a very big role in discussing the realignment process and who's staying where and everything like that. I've seen that, but what has been the most exciting thing about watching Pac-12? And then we can talk a little bit more as you answer that.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of talk a little bit historically, I mean, over the years, the Pac-12, going back, 10 plus years ago, was always known for kind of explosive offense, quarterback play, right? All the best quarterbacks, for years and decades came out of the Pac-12 conference. And
Mhm.
then you saw probably about 10 years ago, really a decline in the play, in the football play within the Pac-12 conference. You saw more and more guys as recruiting kind of became more national, less regionalized. Football became more national and less regionalized. You'd see more and more players leaving home to go play in other parts of the country. It always happened to a degree, right? But at a higher level, and what you saw was a lot of the better players in
Mhm.
California on the West Coast started leaving to go play at Georgia or go play at Alabama or Ohio State or the big time programs in those conferences that are competing for national titles. So, and part of that was driven by, I think, really bad leadership decisions in the Pac-12 conference as well as in the schools themselves. Like USC is a perfect example. Like USC has been a complete disaster on and off the field for ever since Pete Carroll left in the late 2000s. They've made a bad hire after bad hire in the athletic department. They made bad hire after bad hire in the head coaching department, and that has really, as the premier program, historically in this conference, has taken them down, but also really hurt the conference's perception on the national level, and it kind of becomes a domino effect and a snowball, if you will. And so the Pac-12 hasn't been good enough to get a team in the playoffs for a long time. Oregon went in 2014, Washington went in 2016, and there hasn't been a playoff team from the Pac-12 since then, and that has really hurt the conference, as well as fan apathy. Like Oregon has great fans; they get great support at games. Washington, when they're winning, does. Utah does, but most of the other teams around the conference. You go to a game at Cal, go to a game at Stanford, go to a game at Arizona State or Arizona or Colorado before this year. The stands are half empty. And people don't go. They don't care. They don't talk about it. They don't watch on TV, and that is all part of why the Pac-12 is really falling apart. And it's not any one thing. It's a combination of all these things over the last 10 years that has led to the downfall of this conference.
So what's the outcome now of Pac-12? Is everyone have a home?
Almost everyone has a home. So obviously USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington are all going to the Big Ten, which will have 18 teams starting next year. And they released their schedule last week for next year. So we all know which week by week, who's going to be playing where. And then you have Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado are all going to the Big 12 conference. They'll have 16 teams in the Big 12. So that's mostly Texas and the Midwest, the southern plains, southern Midwest area. They also have a couple teams back east in the Big 12. And then Stanford and Cal are going to play in the ACC, the Atlantic Coast Conference, which is kind of crazy. And then Oregon State and Washington State are kind of left without a home right now.
So what are they going to do?
Well, I think they're going to look to play. They're going to look to keep the Pac-12 name alive next year, but they're probably going to have some sort of scheduling partnership with the Mountain West Conference, and then try to figure out what their assets are, how much, if they can rebuild the Pac-12 conference in some other form going forward, or whether they just end up having to dissolve and join a Mountain West or some other conference. So it's really unfortunate for those two programs, because they're probably going to be playing over time with a lot less resources and visibility than they've had in the Pac-12 conference.
Well, that's a bummer. How does that impact, like you said, the players and aspirations and opportunities? Certainly, you just, as a freshman, just come into a program thinking it's a Power Five, and all of a sudden it's dissolved. What happens?
Well, I mean, anybody, excuse me, with the transfer portal now and the one-time exception where you can transfer anywhere and play, right away, anybody in those two programs that wants to transfer out after this season, who hasn't already transferred, right, will certainly be able to do so and play right away next year wherever they end up. And so I would imagine that opportunity will be there for most of the players in either of those two programs.
Well, but Oregon State just got a new quarterback that transferred in.
Yeah, but he's done playing after this year anyway. He's out of eligibility, so he'll be done regardless. So I think it'll be up to each of those players to decide, do they want to transfer and play in one of the other, existing power conferences, that they want to stay with the commitment they made and see out what happens. And right now they don't even know what it's going to look like. I think that's where Oregon State and Washington State are really under the 8 ball. Is the transfer portal opens in less than a month. I think it's 28 days from now. So
December 4th,
yeah, 28 days exactly. So they have to have, I would think they would have to have announced by then, here's where we're going to be playing, here's what our schedule looks like, here's where we're going to be on TV. Otherwise, I mean, it could be a pretty big mass exodus to the transfer portal if they don't.
So realignment has happened. Next year, Ducks go to Big Ten, and you just said the schedule's announced. Before we go there, there's these very important rankings I just learned about come out every Tuesday, and they just started last Tuesday. So tell us about these very important rankings.
Yes. So the college football playoff. So the college football playoff up for the last 10 years, including this year, is 4 teams. So it's more of an invitational than a playoff. You only get, like you said, there's 5 Power 5 conferences, but only 4 teams can make the playoffs. So it's kind of an invite only. There's a selection committee that ranks every week on Tuesday. They come out with their rankings of 1 through 25. Here's how we rank the teams for the college football playoffs. And then in 22 days from now on a Sunday, they'll come out with their final rankings after the conference championship games, and those 4 teams at the top will make the college football playoffs and be eligible to win the national title if they win 2 games in the playoffs. So the rankings come out every Tuesday. It's kind of a show. It's just for show. Until they get to the final rankings, it doesn't really matter, but it does kind of give you an inkling of where things are at, right? So right now they have Ohio State number 1, and they've got Georgia and Michigan 2nd and 3rd, and they've got Florida State 4th, and Washington 5th, and then Oregon 6th. But if you look at it, Oregon and Washington are probably going to have to play again, so they'll knock each other off. One of them will knock the other one off, and Michigan and Ohio State have to play for sure. So
let me ask you this: if Michigan and Ohio State play one another, would they get knocked off, or would they just kind of like go a little bit further down, given they were so high up?
What we've seen historically is the committee, when it gets to the end of the season, they will value the teams that won their conference, right? You get a little bit of an extra boost. So the only one of those 2 teams, Michigan and Ohio State, can win the Big Ten. The other one won't even play in the Big Ten championship game. So it kind of becomes a tiebreaker, if you will. The other thing we've seen historically is that once you lose 2 games, you're not going to make the playoff. No team has ever made the playoff after having lost 2 games. So you get down to the scenario where you look at all the conference champions, and if they're have 0 losses or 1 loss, they're probably in. If you can't fill enough spots because you have conference like if Texas was to lose another game, then the Big 12 will not have a 1-loss conference champion. They're probably out. So Florida State has, the other conferences all could still have 0 and 1-loss teams. And then it kind of becomes a case then to look at, okay, if I have a 12-1 team, like let's say Oregon wins the conference championship and they're 12-1. Are we going to take 12-1 Oregon, or are we going to take a 11-1 Ohio State who lost to Michigan and didn't play in their conference title game? Historically, the 12-1 conference champion would get that spot. Not to say it's guaranteed, but based on what the committee has always done, that would be the case because they value the fact that you had to play an extra game and you won in your conference versus the team that didn't. So there's no guarantees, but that's usually how it works out.
Has it ever been any history of biasness for certain conferences?
I mean, most people would say the SEC probably gets the benefit of the doubt. And the SEC is the conference that has gotten in multiple teams in the same year, more often. Twice they've gotten Georgia and Alabama both in the national in the college football playoffs. Michigan and Ohio State both made it last year. Wouldn't say there was any real bias or controversy about that one because there just wasn't. There was a lack of other teams that that should have gotten that spot anyway. And I think probably the most controversial one was Alabama making it one year, having not won the conference over an Ohio State team that had won their conference and only had one loss. So Ohio State was 12-1, had won the Big Ten. Alabama was, I think, 11-1 and hadn't even won their division and didn't play in the conference title game. And they picked Alabama over Ohio State that year. But Alabama went on to win 2 games and win the national title. So, it's kind of hard to say it was the wrong choice. And Michigan that year lost to Purdue by like 40 points. So that was kind of why they weren't picked. And it just goes to show you, like, one game can mean everything. That's what's so crazy about college football, especially compared to the NFL, is
and how they match
right
up.
now it's every game is so critically important, and your margin for error is so small. Like Oregon right now, they lost a game already. They can't lose another game if they want to make the playoffs. They just can't. They have to win the next 4 games and then hope to get picked.
Yeah, they got to finish what they started. I hear you on that one.
That's right.
So the Ducks.
The Ducks.
We really didn't know a lot. We knew about the Ducks, but we during the transfer portal, we did a lot of research about the various schools, and we thought it was an incredible place. We thought the culture was extraordinary, and the family-like environment just was a home run, for us. And I don't know if you know that from the perspective of a family, but the fans welcome our families tremendously. I never felt like an outsider or transplant, especially since we didn't come in as freshmen. I'll say that. But what makes this love of the Ducks so special from fans, given the fact that you said there's such a history of them being all right to average, good, and now bordering great? Like what causes this love for them?
I'm sure it's probably not that different from many other fan bases. I would imagine.
Well, no, we have in New York. I'm just saying, for New York, we're pitiful.
Yeah.
I'm a Knicks Giants fan, and I'm sorry, and I have to. We say we know, but we love our Knicks and our Giants. Just from a pro perspective, but I have met a few. I saw and is introduced to a few college fan bases, but like, you guys really take the time to get to know us. I can see like you just liking the team, but you guys take the time to know the families. You're commenting, you're DMing us, and maybe that is like the other ones. We're
hopefully
just
good things.
No, hopefully good things. It is, but this is new for me.
Yeah. No, I think there's something to be said. Oregon in general is, there's only one pro sports team in the state of Oregon, the Portland Trailblazers in the NBA, right? And that team has a tremendous fan following, has had for my whole life. And even though they haven't been very good for a long time, they still have very loyal and dedicated fans. And I think some aspect of that goes back to they're the only pro team, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there's something to be said about that with Oregon too, right? Like Oregon is, no offense, Oregon State fans, but Oregon is kind of the football team of the state, right? And so there isn't all these other different you go to LA, right? LA, what's the reputation about LA? And I think it's earned is it's a front running sports town, right? If your team's good, they're going to be out, supporting it. If your team's not, they'll find a different team to support, or they'll be at the beach or doing something else, right? I mean, there's so much going on in Southern California. And so I think unless a particular team is rolling, their fan bases kind of come and go. And I think that's something that's probably a little unique about Oregon, not just Oregon, the state, right? That applies to all of our sports team and obviously the Ducks as well. Is like, there's a lot of great fan support. And I think Oregon, kind of culturally, the state, again, I think there is kind of a get to know your neighbor kind of thing here. Maybe it's not as strong as it used to be. But, having lived here my whole life, I think that's kind of part of what makes it a little unique too. Maybe there's some of that involved. I'm speculating now, but I think there's something to that maybe.
Well, why do you get so deep into it? Why do you do that?
I don't know. I call people like myself like the 1% of the 1%, right? So if you think about, you have You have all of the Oregon Duck fans in the world, right? The 100%, and then you have the 1% of us that are like hardcore, like really follow the team closely, and then you have the 1% of that 1% who are like talking about the team every day, know everybody's name, know everybody's number, know who we're recruiting, know which guy's going to come to a visit this weekend. Like I was like literally before I got on the podcast, I was reading a list of the players, the high school players that were going to be at Oregon this weekend for the game. Like
Wow.
that's 1% of the 1%. It's a sickness really, but
Wow. It's
it's
true. I mean, I
a
don't know if
hobby, passion, right? Like
well, it's also it's also flattering, like to know that someone is that engaged, and they care. Well, they kind of care about your child's well-being. That's how, as a parent, I look at it. When someone says, "Well, how's he doing?" or "How's he getting acclimated to Oregon?" I mean, that's important and that's special, right? But you go into the stats, so I'm going to just throw out a question to you, and unfortunately, I think you're going to answer this right. Or I think you're gonna have an
this
answer.
is the
Like,
test.
no, it's not really a test, but like, what's how do you fare the stats from? I don't know. What would you compare when you make a comparison, or when you determine that this team is the team it is this year? What are you
Mhm.
comparing it to?
Well, usually I compare it to the other teams from this year, right? Because
Oh,
year
I
to
see.
year
Not
things are
oh,
different,
not
right?
from
So
prior teams. Okay.
I mean, there's some of that too. I mean,
Mhm.
to me, it's a combination of I'm definitely a data person, right? I work with data, I work with big data, I work in analytics. So all that stuff is like second nature to me and stuff I've been doing for a very long time, statistics and probabilities and all of those
Mhm.
things. Um, so I like all of that. And so when I look at statistics and those kind of things, I'm usually looking at more of advanced statistics like and there's a lot of great models out there that rank teams based on very complicated formulas, which I like to look at, right? But also there's a bit of just like watching the games, and it's kind of I use a blend, right? Like I'm not
Mhm.
just saying like this team's better because the data says it's better. We
Mhm.
also have to look at the games, right? And there's some people that are only watch the games, and there's some people that only look at the numbers, and I try to look at it both ways. And usually what you see is that what you see happening usually backs up what the numbers say, and what the numbers say usually backs up what you see happening. There's a pretty high correlation if you're really being unbiased about it and watching the game from a student of the game perspective, right? In that they usually correlate pretty well. Now there's always outliers. There's a team that overperforms, on the field compared to what the statistics say they should, or vice versa,
Mhm.
or even what the talent composite of their team says the team should look like. USC's this year is an example of that, right? Like they have a lot of talent, but they're not playing up to the level of talent they have on the field necessarily.
Mm. And was that the same for Oregon's estimation? They had a lot of talent and they are playing to the talent on the field.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at most of the advanced models that I follow, have Oregon ranked like higher than the human polls, right? So Oregon's ranked sixth in the AP poll, sixth in the coaches poll, and sixth in the college football playoff rankings. They are the highest ranked one-loss team in all of those rankings.
Mm.
But if you looked at most of the advanced statistical models, they have Oregon ranked third or fourth. So like SP Plus, which is
Mhm.
on ESPN, FPI on ESPN has Oregon ranked second.
Mhm.
Uh, FEI and F Plus both have Oregon ranked third or fourth, I think, as well. I'm going off memory now, but so it not to say that Oregon's underperforming that ranking, um, but it shows that the models are all saying Oregon is a top four team in the country, and the human polls tend to bias more towards straight win loss record, right? So you're not going to rank a one loss team out of a no loss team, especially a no loss team that beat that one loss team on the field, which makes sense. Like if you were going to rank Oregon and Washington based on what has happened so far this season, you have to rank Washington ahead of Oregon because they won that game.
Mhm.
Now, it doesn't mean you think Washington's a better team. Doesn't mean you think Washington will win if they play again. It just means that based on what's happened so far, it would be unfair to put Oregon ahead of Washington. Now, that can change, if and when they play each other again, obviously, and then it's winner take all. So I think that if you're Oregon, that's what you want to happen. You want to get back to Las Vegas to the Pac-12 championship game and get another shot at Washington then.
Pac-12 championship is December 1st in Las Vegas, as you've said, Doug.
Yep, Friday night.
The There are various teams that are playing. This is November. Teams are going in. There's cannibalism, I understand, happening. Teams are killing each other off. What are some other teams that are in Pac-12 that you think are performing a lot better than they started in the beginning of the season?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously Washington hasn't lost yet, and they're almost certainly going to end up in that game in one of the spots. They'd have to lose 2 out of the last 3, which is pretty unlikely. Oregon is right there. If they win their last 3 games, they're definitely in. The other teams playing for that spot right now are what's that?
Who else could get in? If
USC could get in. If USC beats Oregon this weekend, and then they beat UCLA, they're most likely going to be in that game if they win their last 2 games.
Oh, because they've lost 3, but they've
only lost 2 in conference though.
In the conference, right? Correct.
Yeah, yeah. So if they win the last 2, they'll finish 7-2, and they'll have a tiebreaker over Oregon. They would need Utah to lose a game, but Utah plays at Washington this weekend and then at Arizona the following weekend. So it's probably pretty likely that Utah will lose at least one of those games. So then in that scenario, then USC would get into that game. Now Utah is another team that could get into that game. They have probably the toughest road because they have got to win at Washington, then they've got to win at Arizona, and then they've got to beat Colorado at home, which that one shouldn't be too hard. And then you go Oregon, obviously we already talked about. You go to Arizona next. This is the surprise team in the conference. I mean, they won 1 game 2 years ago. Last year they won 4. And now they're good. Yeah, they're 6-3 right now. They've only lost 2 conference games. They've won 3 in a row. Their defense is significantly improved. They play pretty good offense. Their new quarterback that they've played this year has really done a tremendous job. They're a dangerous team, and they have a pretty good path. They play Utah at home. Their other 2 games are pretty winnable. They play Arizona State, who's not a good football team this year. Can't remember their other last game at Stanford or Cal, but it's a team they should be able to beat pretty easily. So I would probably say outside of Oregon and Washington, they probably have the best path to make it to the Pac-12 title game. Now they got to win them all, and they got to hope Oregon loses one somewhere. That's their way to get in. And then Oregon State's still alive if they win the rest of their games. However, they have a really tough path too because they got to beat Washington and Oregon, which is going to be tough, especially coming to Oregon. They've only won in Autzen Stadium once in the last 30 years. So that will be a tough challenge for them.
See, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm talking about, he tells you when they lost, what year, how many, I mean, all that stuff. This is Doug. So
yeah, they won in Oregon in 2007 against Oregon's 5th quarterback. That Oregon was beset by quarterback injuries that year late in the season, and it was our 5th string quarterback that was playing that game when Oregon State last won in Autzen.
So let's talk about Arizona because I have a couple of questions. Sorry, Utah.
Yeah.
Utah. So you got to talk about the stats with this. Help me explain how Utah was doing extremely well. They're on their backup quarterback, and their score was. I'm sounding really, really vanilla right now. Forgive me, but they were scoring really well. They had really a really good record. We played them. Oregon played them. The score was pretty high on Oregon's side and pretty low on their side. Our defense kind of shut them down. But then they went back and played Arizona State and killed it 55-3. What makes that happen? Was this emotion that was a part of this process, or was this really is Arizona a really challenging team? Tell me about that.
Yeah. So
or is
a lot of it's math.
That good? It's a
little bit of everything. It's a little bit of everything. So, I mean, football is a game of matchups for one. So, right. So sometimes you have teams that maybe this team's better than that team, but team A has just a matchup advantage in a certain position or a certain part of the game. Right. So I think in the case of Utah, first of all, they've been very injured this year, right? They're missing their starting quarterback. They're missing their best tight end. They're missing several other impact players on defense and offense. So they have a great coaching staff in Utah. They always play at a level above their talent. They're always prepared. They're always ready to play. They're tough. They're strong on the lines, right? They're just a really well coached football team. And it was actually quite impressive that they got to the Oregon game having only had one loss on the year, because they'd been kind of holding it together with duct tape and baling wire, as we say, and a tremendous job. And I think they just ran into that game. They ran into an Oregon team that, quite frankly, is just a way better football team. It was also like significant matchup advantages for Oregon in that game. Oregon's defense is tremendously improved this year over last year.
You guys made it sound like the defense was, you guys seem so pleased.
It wasn't good last year. It wasn't good.
And you guys are very
so this year. Look, the last 2 years before this one, Oregon was 123rd and 118th in third down conversion percentage on defense. So they were almost dead last in the country. They couldn't stop a third down to save their life. Well, what happens is you can't stop a third down. The other team just keeps driving the ball down the field, and eventually they're in the red zone, right? And that was just killing Oregon the last couple of years. This year, they're all the way up at like number 25 or 23, I think I saw today. So they're holding. Last year, they were at about 47%. Opposing teams were converting about 47% of third downs. This year, it's like 32%.
Wow.
So it's a significant improvement. And that's just one aspect of the defense. I mean, the defense as a whole has just improved across the board. And when you saw in that Utah game, is Utah doesn't have weapons. The teams that can challenge Oregon's defense are teams like Washington or USC, who have a really good passing quarterback who can make throws down the field, and receivers who can make plays on the ball down the field. And Utah just isn't that team. Utah's a team that's going to line up and try to run the ball on you, and that just plays right into Oregon's strengths. So it's a little bit of that, a little bit of Utah being banged up. Oregon was just ready to play, and they dominated that game. And quite frankly, I mean, the score was 35-6, but Oregon probably could have scored 50. Probably should have scored 50. They left some points on the field in that game, and as Utah's coach said, it was the score was not indicative of how dominant that game was. And then, Utah coming back the next week and beating Arizona State at home. I think there's a lot going to that too. Arizona State is another team that has just tremendous injuries this year. They were playing they had 6 offensive linemen that traveled in that game. Normally you travel like 11, 12 offensive linemen. They've had 6 offensive linemen out with injuries. So imagine what that does to you. And they've been playing really hard, and they gave Washington a game a couple weeks ago. They beat the Colorado the week after that. So Arizona State has been playing with a lot of effort, but they are very undermanned. And I think they finally just kind of ran out of gas in that Utah game, and Utah was probably pretty upset coming off losing at home to Oregon. So I think it was just kind of that perfect storm of Utah was ready and on a mission. Arizona State was just decimated and run out of gas. And in those games, you kind of get those snowball games where, just a little bit all of a sudden turns into this huge momentum, and then the whole thing falls apart. And credit Utah, because they certainly.
What's up with this respect for Utah thing? Oregon, Utah respect. What's that about?
I mean,
it's a different energy than it was playing Washington.
Well, Washington's the rival.
The coach was great. The fans were great. I mean, I can see why, but what's the history behind that?
I mean, there's not a lot of history between Oregon and Utah. I mean, obviously, Utah only joined the Pac-12 conference in 2011, so it's only been 12 years that they've been in the conference. And I think it's hard not to respect what Utah does. It's kind of the cliche, right? They do things the right way, right? Their coach has been the coach for 18 years. He knows what his program is good at. He knows what his limitations are. He's not going to go out and recruit, a top 10 class, right? He's got to get a lot of maybe, less heralded players and get them in the system and coach them up and have them there for 3, 4, 5 years. Right. And that's what they do. And they do it really well. They do it better than anybody. And he's really built that program into one that, has played in 4 of the last 5 Pac-12 championship games, won the last 2. So I think there's a lot of respect for the way they do it. I respected the way that they ended that game against Oregon, right? Like the game was over. Everybody knew it. And what did he do the last 2 times they got the ball? He just, ran the ball up the middle, chewed up the clock, punted, right? He wasn't trying to do all the, like you saw, go back to the Colorado game, right? And what do you see happening? I mean, the game was 42-0, and Colorado's like calling timeouts and running hurry up offense and trying to run down the field and score a meaningless touchdown, with 10 seconds left in the game, right? Like, it's just, it's
Mhm.
I don't know. It's just a different way of approaching those kind of scenarios. So I think there's a lot of respect there
Mhm.
with
I understand. I
with what
understand.
Oregon does. Yeah.
And so in light of that, what about the big letdown? I mean, some teams I've heard a couple of times that teams do really well on one game. They may score real high, and then there's this letdown that happens right after.
Yeah.
Are you guys, is there a thought that this could happen to Oregon the way they've been moving?
I mean, it could certainly happen to anybody, right? I mean, that's college football, especially, right? Because these are college kids. They got school, they got classes, they got all the other things you have to balance. They're not. I mean,
They're
some will
not
say they are.
perfect, right? They're
Some will
not
say they are professionals, but I know I was gonna say some will say they're
They're not
professionals.
professionals and they're not perfect. They're children, right?
Right, right. Well, I'm not gonna call them children, but yes,
Well,
they're
they're
not.
students.
Right, but they have a lot of stuff going on, so it's more apt to happen in college than you see in the NFL, and so you see the letdown games happen either after a big win or after a big rivalry game, or whether you win or lose, right? So you often can see letdowns in those scenarios. One thing that I've been really impressed by with Dan Lanning and the coaching staff at Oregon so far is I haven't seen that happen. And now we're 13 games last year plus 9 this year. We're 22 games in. I don't think there's been a letdown game yet in his tenure, which is pretty impressive. It feels like
Hmm.
they have got this team really dialed into the kind of one game at a time mentality. I mean, after the Washington game, that would have been a time where you could have seen a letdown happen the next game. They started a little slow against Washington State, but then they just turned on the afterburners and blew them out. And then you know then Stanford, no problem. Not Stanford. Who they play after Washington State? Was it Stanford?
Utah.
No, then it was Utah. Yeah, then they go to Utah and blow the doors off Utah. Then you come back home and you play Cal this weekend. That's another opportunity, right? You're riding high off that big road win. Cal's not a very good football team. It's an opportunity to kind of have a letdown. They didn't do it. They came out again. They're a little sloppy early. Maybe that was the weather and the ball was wet and those things. But again, they blew Cal out. So it's a team that just seems to really handle that, so much better than a lot of Oregon teams I've seen in the past, where under the previous coaching staff, you were good for at least 2 or 3 letdown games a year. Games where there was, in fact, 2018 is a good example. So 2018, it was the first year of the Mario Cristobal coaching staff, and the team got off to a really good start, and they beat Washington at home. And Washington was a much, was coming off of 3 straight, or they were about to be on their 3rd straight New Year's 6 bowl game, right? They had won the conference in 2016. They finished 2nd in 2017. They were leading the conference in 2018. They came to Oregon, came to Eugene, and Oregon won. Walk-off touchdown in overtime. Whole place celebrated. It was fantastic. Kayvon Thibodeau was there. That was when he committed to Oregon after that game. But big win, right? What happened the next week? They go to Washington State. They got blown out. 28-zip first half. Like, they just didn't show up. And then they went the next week after that. They went down to Arizona and got blown out. Like, it's like they won this amazing game, gave themselves an incredible opportunity, and then they just laid 2 eggs in a row. And that's what you can't have. And that's what this team hasn't done so far this year.
So this team, this team is now bowl eligible, right?
Oh yeah.
And aiming to get into the college playoffs, college football playoffs, so they can ultimately win the Natty. But talk to me about the different bowls, right? Because you see different ones, and there's ones that you want to get into before New Year's, and then ones after New Year's. So let's talk about those bowls.
Yeah, so we'll start with there's 6 what they call the New Year's 6 bowls, right? And there's and those rotate through every year. So 2 of those every year will be your 2 playoff games, your semifinal playoff games, and the other 4 are kind of the next best bowls that you want to be in, right? So you don't make the playoffs, but it's still a really prestigious game. So this year, the playoff games are the Rose Bowl in LA and the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans. So the 4 playoff teams will be playing in those 2 games. And then beyond that, you have the Orange Bowl in Miami, you have the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, you have the Fiesta Bowl in Phoenix, and you have the Peach Bowl in Atlanta. And some of the Orange Bowl has to take an ACC team, and I think that's the only commitment in those games. So if you don't make the playoffs, then you want to be in one of those games. If you're Oregon and don't make the playoffs, then you're probably going to either play in the Fiesta Bowl in Phoenix or the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. And that would be if let's say you go 10-2, you lose another game, somewhere, or you go to the Pac-12 title game but you don't win it. Those would be the scenarios where you're in either one of those two games. And then beyond that, the bowls are contracted to the individual conferences. So for the Pac-12 conference, the next bowl down would be the Alamo Bowl, which is in San Antonio. Oregon went to that 2 years ago. Lost to Oklahoma. That was when they were in between coaching staffs, and like a lot of players had. What you're starting to see more and more too is these players who are either going to the NFL or going to transfer to another school don't play in those games, right? So a lot of times they become kind of like young player, exhibition games, or an opportunity for younger players who don't play a lot to get playing time, kind of prove themselves for the next season or whatever. Kind of coaches get an opportunity to see, hey, what do we got with these younger guys, right? So you got the Alamo Bowl, and then after that you got the Holiday Bowl, which is where Oregon played last year against North Carolina, and that's in San Diego. And then you've got the Las Vegas Bowl would be the next one after that, which will be against a Big Ten team this year. And then Oregon wouldn't fall lower than any of those games, but there's certainly another Sun Bowl in El Paso. There's the LA Bowl in LA.
I heard about these. I know New York too, right? There's
that's not one that deals with the Pac-12, but that's a play of that in Yankee Stadium, which is pretty funny.
Yeah.
Bowl games in baseball stadiums are weird.
I would imagine, right? I would imagine. Shout out to Tina VP. I see you saying "Go Ducks." I saw you. You have gotten. I just want to let you know, as being in Oregon, you have acquired a tremendous more amount of New York or East Coast Duck fans, and I would not attribute it because of a Johnny Cornelius. It's easy for me to say that. But I just want the transfer portal helps with that. You have so many new talent that's coming from across the country. Philly, Alabama, South Carolina, Chicago, all these places that probably wouldn't even think about the West Coast. Now you have all these different families that watch their children and their friends that watch their children play this game, that's pretty exciting,
Yeah, Oregon's a little bit unique in as far as like top level college football programs. Oregon doesn't have a lot of like high level talent in Oregon playing high school football, and so as Oregon kind of rose to prominence, as we talked about before throughout the 90s and early 2000s, what they did two things to kind of build their kind of national brand, if you will, and kind of build their notoriety around the country. One was kind of the marketing and the Nike influence and the uniforms and all those things that kind of helped Oregon stand out from the crowd of football programs. And the other thing they've done, especially in the last, 5 to 7, 8 years, is they've really recruited nationally because they've had to, right? Because you got to go everywhere to get talent. And Oregon's been one of the teams that's done that, at least from the West Coast, that's done that better than anybody. Especially, over the last 5, 6, 7 years. The Oregon, I think, was maybe the last class or the one before, Oregon had high school recruit commitments from like people from 21 different states. It was a very large number, right? And we've got multiple players from Florida and Georgia and like South Carolina. I know we've got a couple from Illinois and Pennsylvania, and this current high school class that's going to sign here in a month or so.
Wow.
There's 3 or 4 from like the Washington D.C. area coming in, right? So Texas is another one where Oregon's hitting Texas big again. Texas was a big recruiting area for Oregon probably 10, 15 years ago. Hasn't been as good of late, but this last 2 cycles they're back in Texas again and hitting that hard. So just go everywhere, and obviously California being big source of talent as well.
So the
Arizona.
In Arizona. One of the things I love to watch every Tuesday, and I think we all do, is a cinematic recap of every game. I know they're right. I know it's like you can't wait. It's like an addiction, right? But one of the last one, if anyone has watched, talked about how the Ducks are viewed nationally. And one of the things was they were not viewed as tough, right? And so Why is
Ridiculous.
that? Why is the Pac-12? I don't know if that's a Pac-12 thing or whatever, but why is it that, when you think of a certain uh, image as far as toughness, you probably think of one conference specifically, um, and what is lacking and what was lacking. I don't think that's the case at all, but I'm just
No.
saying the bias that's out there is giving the assumption that one conference offers certain things and not the other.
I think there's a number of factors at play here. There's obviously, I think, an East Coast bias. The most of the media and college football media is based in the East Coast. It's very centered around the Southeastern Conference, right? So I think there is some inherent bias there. However, and I think and that bias is both against Oregon, but also the Pac-12 and West Coast football in general. Some of that dovetails into what we talked about before, where they haven't played at the highest level. So therefore, there's a lack of toughness or whatever, and especially on the offensive and defensive lines. I think in Oregon's case specifically, another factor playing into that is at the height of Oregon's kind of previous highs under Chip Kelly, in the late 2000s, early 2010s, it was a team that was built on speed and finesse, and Oregon didn't really have access to high level offensive linemen or high level defensive linemen. So they recruited offensive linemen specifically who were more agile and nimble, and they played to a style that kind of made that weakness into a strength, if you will, for the type of football they were playing. And they were very successful with it. Chip Kelly was 42-7 in his 4 years as the head coach. So, very extremely successful. However, they got to the 2010 national title game and their high-powered offense got shut down by Auburn from the SEC. And then they played the next season, in the first game of the year, they played LSU from the SEC, and they kind of got shut down in that game. And so that kind of started creating this narrative that Oregon didn't have strong trenches, didn't have good toughness, right? Didn't all those things you said. And then, they made it back to the national title game a few years later, and Ohio State kind of dominated them along the line. So it kind of just perpetuated this. And there was some truth to this, right? At the time, Oregon's team was built differently. And I think what you see with these narratives is they take a long time to get started, but they also take a long time to get changed. I mean, I can't tell you.
Well, last year, the Georgia game, that was just
that didn't help either. You're right. That's one that didn't help. Although I don't think that was as much about trench play. I don't think they got dominated on the trenches that bad in that game. But one of the things that is so funny to me. So when Mario Cristobal took over as head coach in 2018, and through his 4 years, Oregon played a much slower tempo than they had played under Chip and Mark Helfrich and Willie Taggart and the previous coaches. They were playing much lower scoring type of football, right? I can't tell you how many times I would turn on and watch a game, and the TV announcer, who's paid a lot of money to call these games, are saying, well, the Ducks come in with their high flying offense, and I'm like, we haven't had a high flying offense in 4 years. Where have you been? That offense left town 3 coaches ago. But that's how long it takes these narratives to change, right? And I would just laugh every time I'd hear that. I'm like, I don't think this guy's watched a Duck game in 5 years. And I think that's what's happening with the trenches, because the other thing that Mario did when he was here was he actually started focusing on building the line of scrimmage talent, right, on the offensive line and the defensive line. And then when he left and Dan Lanning took over, that jumped up even more, particularly on the defensive line. I mean, the offensive line recruiting got even better, and the defensive line recruiting just exploded, as we've seen in these last, and with the transfer portal as well. So the narrative that Oregon doesn't have the trench play or doesn't have the toughness or the strength on the line of scrimmage is absolutely false. But it's just people, they take so long to catch up to the reality, and they're living off of narratives, that they believe from 5, 6, 7 years ago, and it's hard to get them to turn around. So I think that's why that narrative is there, and I think that's why games like that Utah game, and obviously if Oregon ends up playing, a Michigan or an Ohio State or a Florida State or a Georgia or an Alabama or a Texas in a playoff game, that is another game that could, could start changing that narrative even more, right?
Right.
Long-winded answer.
No. It's important. It's important. I often I think everybody would love to see those bowl games happen, or that championship with some Pac-12, specifically with Oregon in it, just to see. And I'm sure the players would love that, to be able to
Mhm.
play against other players in the country that are the best,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously
Always
the players
right.
all want to be in the playoffs, right? The fans want them to be there. They want to be there. They want to see how
Of
they
course.
stack up. And this is the great thing about realignment in Oregon's case is because
Mm,
guess what? Next year we're going to the Big Ten, and now we're playing in that conference. And we're going to play Ohio State, and we're going to play Michigan, we're going to play Penn State, we're going to play Wisconsin, we're going to play Iowa, we're going to play
mhm.
all these teams that are big and strong on the line of scrimmage, right? So now you're going to see how we stack up, and we're not, that kind of you kind of get rid of some of the Pac-12 reputational baggage one way or the other. Now you're going to have a harder schedule. You got to prove it on the field, but every player wants to play on that big stage, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, look, let's look at that, right? So it is about 8 games at home and 4 or 5 games away. I love the connection that Oregon keeps with Hawaii. Could you talk us a little bit about what that's about? Because next year, Oregon plays in Hawaii, which is pretty awesome. I
Yeah,
want to say all my friends, if you want
I've
to
already
go,
got my trip booked.
you got your trip book already.
Yeah,
Hey Dave, what's going on? The best versus the best, right? But let me just say, like, I love when Hawaii came to Oregon and played,
Mhm.
the fans like gave them a standing ovation. I don't was it just because was it connected to the Maui fires, or was it just an overall level of respect?
I think there was probably a little bit of both there. I
Mhm.
think um, Oregon fans, I think, are pretty welcoming in general to other fan bases and teams other than rivals, right? Like or teams that you're not gonna they when the other Pac-12 teams show up, they're gonna boo them like everybody fan base does when they come in the stadium.
Right.
But I've seen I've been to a lot of. I think the Maui fires were definitely a factor there, but I also
Right.
think that like Oregon I mean, Hawaii is a team that you're obviously going to dominate, and Oregon did, right? It's a lower level of football. It's kind of like have some respect for a team that traveled all this way. They're going to take their check and they're going to take their beat down, and so it's kind of like you're going to respect them for it, though, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
I think there's a little bit of that going on, and I think there's when you see Nebraska came out here a few years ago, and I thought that we treated their fans really well when and I think the same thing when I see other teams travel out here. When Texas Tech comes out here next year, I assume we will also. So I think it's good. You're gonna razz Washington. You're gonna razz Oregon State fans. We gave some razzing to BYU fans when they came out last year, but I think it's more of like good-natured, fun fan razzing, and not like mean-spirited. At least in my section where I sit, that's what I see. That's what I like to hear.
Well, I think that's great. You guys definitely have an incredible fan base, and it's very welcoming. And I love the Polynesian connection, especially since a lot of the players make that connection. Was that also based upon the relationship with Marcus Mariota, or what was that?
Yeah, I think there's a long tradition of great Oregon players from the islands, right? So Mariota, Haloti Ngata. Oregon actually has, I don't know, 7 or 8, 9 Polynesian players on the team right now, right? That are from Hawaii or from Samoa or from various places,
Mhm,
or whose family backgrounds are, right? So I do think there's a lot of history there, a lot of connection
mhm.
with Polynesian players, and I think that is probably an extra level of that kind of love and respect there in that game for sure.
Well, Doug, I mean, I think this has been incredible. Tell us where we can hear you on your podcast. Tell us about the time and place, or how often we can hear you if we want to continue to support you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so I co-host the QB11 show with my partner QB11. Funny enough, so you can find us on Twitter at QB11 show. You can certainly follow me on Twitter at Douglas TS. Um, and our show is on Spotify or Apple iTunes or Google, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can find it. Just look for QB11 show. We generally talk about the Ducks
11.
football. We talk about Pac-12 football. We talk about college football in general.
Mhm.
When there's stories that cover the gamut of college football. So that's definitely where you can find us. And maybe we'll get on YouTube one of these days, like you are.
Well, if you need another perspective, we're always around to get on the show. We'd love to get on.
Yeah. Well, you're welcome to you're welcome to come on as a guest anytime and let me ask you questions.
I don't know about it. I'm scared already hearing that. If it's not about tailgating, I don't know, but we'll
Well, we
figure it
can
out.
just talk about tailgating. We'll
I'd
get
be
Shelby
honored.
on. We'll talk about the Jello shot flavors of the week.
So what are you making this weekend? Just FYI, huh? Do you know yet?
I am off duty. My other tailgate partners are going to cook. They're having chili and a macaroni and cheese bar. So
Really?
yeah.
Today, this weekend is a night game. So what's the night game like in Austin?
Well, I think it'll be good. I think the students will be more riled up. So I think that, and it'll be USC, so it's a big game, So I think it's going to be a fun environment. It'll be loud. I think I'd say our best home crowd this year is probably Colorado so far.
That's true.
But last year the best one was UCLA, and that was better than the Colorado crowd. So I kind of expect this to be at least Colorado level. Kind of excitement. I think it'll be full. The students will be loud and rowdy. The fan bases will be loud. It's always better under the lights too.
Under the lights,
fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully the uniform looks good. You've seen it yet?
No, I don't.
No?
I don't get the. I
You
don't
don't
get
get
a
any- you don't get a
premiere.
sneak
I don't get
peek?
the premiere more better. I get it just like you.
Oh
When
man. Okay.
When they present it on Wednesday, I get it just like you. I don't get a hook. My son does not call me and say, "Hey, mom, this is what we're wearing." I don't know until.
You need to get him. You need to get the hookup going.
Are you
need to get
saying,
some
wait,
inside
I'm out of
info for
touch,
us.
huh? I'm out of touch.
He's working hard. He's got his nose down, working on his school, working on his playbook. He's doing a great job.
Thank you for all of the people in New York that are watching and are supporting Johnny. How do you think he's doing?
Oh, he's doing great. We were very excited when we found out we needed a tackles. And so when we found out that Oregon was pursuing him, we were excited. When we found out that he was going to come out on a visit, we were even more excited. And then obviously when he picked Oregon, we were ecstatic. And
were you guys surprised?
I mean, you feel like we had a lot to offer. So, I mean, surprised, but you also say, oh, you're going up against Nebraska, or you're going up against Ohio State, and I can't remember who the fourth team was that you visited.
Tennessee.
But it was, Tennessee, right? So these are all premium programs. So you're surprised because that's a good list of programs, right? And they all have things to offer too. So you're surprised, but I think we felt confident with some things that we had heard. I don't, behind the scenes, I guess. So we were surprised, but super excited about it. And I got to meet you out of it. So that's been great. It's been an extra special bonus out of it. But no, I wouldn't say, certainly surprised, but in a good way.
I'm just coming from the East Coast to the West Coast, a lot of people, that's what I was saying, But
that's probably the more surprising part. Yeah. There's a long way to come from New York and Rhode Island. But I know as soon as that happened, or even probably before, QB was watching all his Rhode Island film, and especially when he played like Power 5 teams and whatnot. And I think he felt pretty confident from the beginning that he was going to be able to step right in at right tackle. But it's a level of football up, and so nice, until you see it on the field, you're like, okay, I think is he going to be like an average Pac-12 right tackle, or is he going to be a good, and it's proven he's one of the best. He's one of the best in the conference, and so it's been, he's part of an offensive line that's one of the best in the country.
Incredible. Yeah, incredible.
No doubt.
Joe Moore.
Joe Moore. I was talking about this on the podcast this morning. I think it's Michigan or Oregon. I think those are the only two teams that are in the running right now for the Joe Moore, and I think it's Oregon's turn to win.
I think
This line, yeah.
We need all of our listeners to say Oregon for Joe Moore. I don't know what influences them, but Joe Moore.
I don't know. We got to keep getting those pancake blocks. I know Johnny got the pancake of the week early in the year, and I think Jackson's got a couple of them now, and so we seem to keep getting in those. I think Johnny's had another one this week that was making the rounds on Twitter.
Oh, maybe it'll join. Maybe it'll come up. If we do, we'll let everybody know to go vote.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a great thing. The Oregon fans do a great job when those things come up.
We do
a great job of piling on and stacking the votes and come on, get in there.
It's true. We've been able to get acclimated and get the respect from the fan base. Like I said, this has been an incredible fan base, and they've made him feel very comfortable and like a duck. And I just want to say thanks again. We're going to make sure that we support QB11. And you just need to continue to do what you do and tell your truth, because when you stick to it, people respect you even when it may not be popular, but your views are always on point. And thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And thanks for having me on the show. This has been a lot of fun. It wasn't so bad. You didn't grill me too hard.
No, I wait for podcasting. I wait for the tailgating to do that.
Yeah. What are you bringing this week?
I don't know that. I'll have to circle back. I was thinking about a couple of things. And I'm sorry, David, it's not going to be vegan. So it's going to probably be David is one of my very good friends, and he's vegan. So I was thinking about either some chicken, and being that it's night, we can really go in, right?
Yeah, we've had so many morning games this year. Ugh.
Right. What time can we get there? So we can get there like all day, right?
I could think 1:30.
Oh yeah, we could be there like all day. So I was thinking about lamb chops. I was thinking about having some food to bring, but I was also thinking about grilling some chicken or something like that. I gotta figure it out. I don't know yet.
All right. Well, we'll definitely.
I'm sure you'll be waiting to find out, but I'll let you know.
Saturday.
I'll let you know.
Yeah, ditto.
All right, Doug Scott, everybody. Host of the QB11 show. Thank you for coming on the show. You've been great. And if you don't know this, we have a rebroadcast of this at 10:30 our time, 7:30 your time. And yes, Coach Steph is coming too. He's one of Johnny's former coaches at Harlem Jets. So you'll get to meet.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, you'll get to meet him too. And he's happy for the Lambs. So thank you for coming on, and
thank you guys.
On to the next one. Doug Scott.
On to the next. Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you for coming on the show, everybody. Phoenix Souls in the house, and we'll be there next week. Talk soon.